A line has been crossed. A prominent American political voice has been silenced, not by debate, but by a bullet. The assassination of Charlie Kirk, a 31-year-old husband and father, isn't just an epic tragedy, it's a political earthquake, and the aftershocks are threatening to permanently reshape one of the most contentious issues in American life. This single violent act has thrown the entire gun debate into a new light. It forces us to ask a question that many have been afraid to confront. How will the shocking death of a major conservative figure permanently alter the future of gun legislation and the core arguments around the Second Amendment? Before we get into that, if you're finding this content valuable, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It would be much appreciated as we make a dash to 1,000 subs. This isn't a theoretical exercise anymore. The stakes have never been higher. In the hours and days following the assassination at Utah Valley University, the response was as predictable as it was polarized. We saw an outpouring of grief and condemnation from across the political spectrum, a rare moment of unity in decrying the act itself. But that unity was fragile, and it shattered almost instantly as the ugly side of humanity emerged when some of those who opposed Charlie's views stooped so low as to celebrate his demise. On one side, the narrative quickly formed that this was an attack on free speech, an inevitable consequence of escalating political rhetoric against conservatives. Within the pro-gun community, the message was clear. This is precisely why the Second Amendment exists. Their argument, which we'll explore deeper, is that an armed citizenry is the ultimate defense not just against common criminals, but against politically motivated violence. They see this not as a failure of gun rights, but as a failure of security. This event became another example of the limitation of law enforcement and security teams in apprehending such a threat and the vulnerability and continued danger gun-free zones continue to pose. On the other side, the anti-gun community and gun control advocates saw the assassination as the ultimate proof of their long-held fears. Their narrative focused on how the easy accessibility of firearms enables political grievances to turn deadly. They pointed to the location, a university campus, and the political nature of the event as evidence that our current laws are dangerously insufficient. For them, this wasn't an isolated act. It was a symptom of a society saturated with weapons where political disagreements can escalate to fatal conclusions with horrifying ease. The calls for new stricter legislation were immediate and intense, focusing on everything from universal background checks to red flag laws and new restrictions on firearms and sensitive locations like schools. While all this was happening, authorities launched a massive manhunt that ended 33 hours later with the arrest of a 22-year-old male whose name I refuse to mention. By the time he was in custody, the two Americas had already retreated into their ideological corners. The assassination wasn't a moment for national unity. It was a fuel for a fire that was already burning out of control. To understand where we go from here, we have to understand the battlefield itself, the Second Amendment. For decades, the debate has been locked in a stalemate between two fundamentally different ways of reading it. First, you have the individual right theory. This view, which the Supreme Court affirmed in the landmark 2008 Heller case, says that the Second Amendment protects your personal right to own a gun for lawful purposes, especially for self-defense in your home. Supporters believe the phrase is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. For them, this right is a bedrock of American liberty, a final check on potential government overreach, and a practical tool for personal safety. Any law that keeps a law-abiding citizen from owning a gun is seen as an infringement on that constitutional right. The second interpretation is the collective rights theory. This side focuses on the amendment's opening clause, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. They argue that the amendment was meant to ensure a state could maintain a militia like today's National Guard, not to give every individual an unlimited right to own any weapon they want. They believe lawmakers have the authority to regulate firearms for public safety without violating the Constitution. Historically, major gun control laws have often followed moments of national trauma, like the gangster era of the 1920s, leading to the National Firearms Act of 1934, or the assassinations of the 1960s, which led to the Gun Control Act of 1968. The assassination of Charlie Kirk weaponizes both of these interpretations. For gun rights advocates, it's the ultimate proof of why you need to be armed, because you can't always rely on the state to protect you. For gun control advocates, it's the ultimate proof of why public safety must allow for regulating deadly weapons, because their spread makes this kind of political violence more likely. This event has pushed both sides to the logical extremes, making compromise feel more distant than ever. So what happens now in Congress and in state houses across the country? History shows us that high-profile acts of gun violence almost always trigger a wave of new bills. We saw it after Columbine, Sandy Hook, Parkland, and Uvalde. Public demand for stricter laws often spikes right after these tragedies. In the wake of Kirk's death, we can expect a flood of proposed legislation from one side. Because the assassination happened at a university, there will almost certainly be a push to expand gun-free zones. Expect intense debates over national red flag laws, universal background checks, and mandatory waiting periods, which supporters argue could reduce violence. The conversation around banning certain firearms, often called assault weapon, which was a federal law from 1994 to 2004, will inevitably be reignited, even though the weapon used in Charlie Kirk's assassination was not a so-called assault rifle. But now, this legislative push will hit a wall of opposition that is more energized than ever. The pro-Second Amendment movement, seeing one of its own leaders killed, will frame any attempt at gun control not as a safety measure, but as a politically motivated effort to disarm them, leaving them vulnerable to more attacks. Their counter-argument will be swift and powerful. The problem isn't the gun, it's the violent political extremism that motivated the killer. Their legislative push will focus on harsher punishments for criminals and, most significantly, on rolling back restrictions. We will likely see a surge in efforts to pass constitutional carry laws, which let citizens carry firearms without a permit. Research has shown that in some Republican-controlled states, mass shootings can lead to laws that loosen gun restrictions. This creates a paradox. A horrific act of gun violence, which you'd think would lead to more gun control, could very well do the exact opposite in many parts of the country. The assassination of Charlie Kirk will likely deepen the legislative divide, creating an America where a patchwork of contradictory gun laws changes dramatically the moment you cross a state line. Which brings me to my next point, and it's a crucial one. We have talked about the political and legislative fallout, but there's a deeper cultural shift at play here. Beyond the laws and the political posturing, an event like this changes our culture. The assassination of a political figure with a firearm represents the intersection of two of America's most volatile trends: extreme political polarization and the prevalence of guns. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. On one hand, you have the risk of a chilling effect. Will political commentators, activists, and even everyday people start to self-censor, afraid their words could make them a target? When political speech can lead to actual violence, it forces everyone to reconsider the cost of speaking their mind. That's a direct threat to the free and open debate a healthy democracy depends on, and the very principle Charlie Kirk stood for. Conversely, and maybe more likely, this event could lead to an escalation. Instead of a chilling effect, we might see a hardening of positions. The us versus them framing, already a staple of our political commentary, will become even more pronounced. Both sides will believe that the other side isn't just wrong. They are portrayed as dangerous. Their rhetoric isn't just disagreeable, it's an incitement to violence. That mindset makes finding common ground feel impossible. The assassination forces the pro-gun community to directly confront political violence committed with firearms, a topic they often frame in terms of crime or mental illness. At the same time, it forces the anti-gun community to confront the fact that a prominent conservative was the victim, challenging any unspoken narrative that gun violence primarily affects other communities. This event scrambles the old arguments and forces everyone to look at the problem through a new, more disturbing lens. It feeds into a deeply troubling national conversation about whether political violence is becoming acceptable, where guns are no longer just tools for hunting or self-defense, but have become the weapon of choice for violent extremists. The assassination of Charlie Kirk is a pivotal moment, a tragedy that will leave a permanent scar on the American political landscape. In the short term, it has poured gasoline on the fire of the gun debate, making the demands from both sides louder and the divide deeper. But in the long term, its implications are far more profound. This event will likely lead to a legislative tug-of-war, with federal proposals for stricter gun control clashing against a powerful state-level movement to expand gun rights. The core arguments around the Second Amendment have been permanently twisted because the debate is no longer just about hunting or sport, or even defense against a common criminal. It is now, unfortunately, about defending yourself from your political opponents. And that leaves us with a final chilling question. In a nation this divided and this heavily armed, will we ever again find a peaceful compromise? If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and watch the next video right here. Train hard, often, and safely, and I'll see you at the range.